earlier this week when Vicki reminded me that we had talked about having a recorder ensemble playing on this Sunday. I said, yeah, that sounds good, and kept going about like worrying for today's sermon. And so now, having heard the ensemble, I can say, yeah, that sounds good. Thank you. This week has been fraught with emotions and reactions and dawning realizations from this past Tuesday's election. Many among us are lamenting. Many people are angry and frightened by what is presenting as a march toward fascism in our country. In my description for today's service, I stated that W.H. Auden wrote a poem entitled September 1st, 1939. I mention it because the last line of that poem is the title for this sermon, To Show an Affirming Flame. The title of the poem, September 1st, 1939, refers to the beginning of World War II. The poem itself is a denouncement of fascism and a call toward solidarity. I sit in one of the dives on 52nd Street, Auden begins, uncertain and afraid as the clever hopes expire of a low, dishonest decade. Waves of anger and fear circulate over the bright and darkened lands of the earth, obsessing our private lives. The unmentionable odor of death offends the September air. Auden goes on to decry the madness and cruelty of the era leading to Adolf Hitler's ascendancy to power, the lies and apathy that allowed evil to gain control. Some literary critics have suggested this is Auden's best poem, indeed calling it the best poem of the 20th century. It is laced with references to the history of democracy as a concept and the steady erosion we suffer again and again. It calls us both to rise with our individual responsibility and to stay firm in our communal solidarity. The second to final stanza reads, "All I have is a voice to undo the folded lie, the romantic lie in the brain of the sensual man in the street and the lie of authority whose buildings grope the sky. There is no such thing as the state, and no one exists alone. Hunger allows no choice to the citizen or the police. We must love one another or die." We must love one another or die, he wrote. True then and true still today, all I have is this voice to undo the folded lie. This past election season will perhaps be best remembered for all the incredible lies. Democracy is embedded with certain values. We often speak of our religious values in this space, but there is overlap. For democracy, chief values are certainly liberty, freedom, and justice. A democracy assumes an informed citizenry, so there's an implied value of education and critical thinking. Equality and forbearance, or at least tolerance, round out the necessary values for a democracy to thrive. I am hard-pressed to find examples of these values in our incoming president-elect Donald Trump, or in the policies and promises that he has made. I instead see crass vulgarity, posturing and bullying, deceit and lies, and divisiveness. Divisiveness is a common tool of authoritarian politics, not for democracies. I saw a list of the early warning signs of fascism as displayed at a Holocaust museum, and I posted it on my social media. If you're looking for it, you can find it there. The list of warnings include powerful and continuing nationalism, disdain for human rights, identification of enemies as a unifying cause, supremacy of the military, rampant sexism, controlled mass media, obsessing with national security, religion and government entwined, corporate power protected, labor power suppressed, disdain for intellectuals and the arts, obsession with crime and punishment, rampant cronyism and corruption. And to be clear, some of what is likely to happen over the next 4 years is basic policy changes that happen every time there's a change in the party. It's the stuff that I will argue against, plans that will go against my values, actions that I find objectionable, but ultimately match what previous administrations that I disagree with have done. But then there will be things that tear apart the structures of democracy in favor of constructing fascist oligarchy. There's still harm committed in that first set of policies and actions. A tragic example is Ronald Reagan's refusal to recognize AIDS, which led to a great deal of death and suffering. In making this distinction between basic party changes and fascist plans, I don't want to minimize the harm and suffering that results from the former. I'm merely lifting up the truth that as long as our democracy remains intact, there is recourse. In her 2018 book, Fascism, A Warning, Madeleine Albright had written, "A fascist is someone who claims to speak for a whole nation or group, is utterly unconcerned with the rights of others, and is willing to use violence and whatever other means are necessary to achieve the goals he or she might have." We've already seen 4 years of a Donald Trump presidency. We don't need to guess at what the second term might contain. The rights of queer and trans people are under threat. Immigrants and people of color are at risk. Women's access to reproductive health care is under attack. Trump will quite likely pull all support from Ukraine and NATO, allowing Putin free rein for Russian military expansion. I can't imagine what he will do to support the Palestinians either. He will certainly pull us out of the Paris Climate Accords again, so our efforts to respond to the climate crisis will be stalled. And he has promised to destroy the Affordable Care Act, an unattained goal he had last time he was in office. And his whole re-election campaign was centered around the untenable promise of mass deportations of undocumented immigrants. Honestly, I don't think fascism will arrive in the United States as concentration camps in the near future. We already have a robust prison system that serves the same purpose. Where else would we get the labor to cover the work undocumented immigrants were doing once we've deported them? Or if we bother deporting them at all, when we could just pump them into the prison system. Stock prices for private prisons jumped this past week. But in all of that, I am well convinced the signature play of the Trump re-election campaign has been the rampant use of misinformation, disinformation, and lies. People talk about how fascists go after the journalists, but I believe the current MAGA political right wing has circumvented the need to silence journalists by blasting media with lies and sensational nonsense so no signal can make it through the noise. Everyone is so numb to the lies. Countless stories are emerging of people saying they voted for him, but they don't believe that he will really dismantle the Affordable Care Act because they need it, or deport all the immigrants because they're married to one, or make abortions illegal at the federal level because their mistresses still need access. There is a subset of people who voted for him who know he's a liar and don't believe him. And I'm hearing progressives say, believe him. He's telling you the harm he is planning to cause. Believe him. But there are so many lies. Which ones matter? Which ones should I trust? And all I have is a voice to undo the folded lie. In Auden's poem, the lie was about believing a dictator was better equipped to make decisions for you. In Auden's poem, the lie was that an individual exists alone and would not experience the consequences of a semi-distant evil about to land on someone else. In Auden's poem, the lie was all those people who went along with the Nazis because they thought the economic policy sounded better. There are guardrails still in place to protect our democracy today. And if we are tempting fascism, it will not drop upon us overnight. We can still pay attention. We can still resist. Part of the work is to continue to do what we've been doing, building relationships with people and communities doing good work in the world around us. We can keep working to support change for unhoused people in Broome County. We can keep working to feed people with the beloved community. We can keep educating ourselves about racism and white supremacy. We can keep supporting Planned Parenthood and other local abortion providers. We can keep advocating for queer youth and creating spaces for trans and queer people to have a welcome and safe place. And my list goes on. We are already doing a lot of what we need to be doing together, locally, where it matters most, and beyond. The final stanza of Auden's September 1st, 1939 poem says this: defenseless under the night, our world in stupor lies. Yet dotted everywhere, ironic points of light flash out wherever the just exchange their messages. May I, composed like them of eros and of dust, beleaguered by the same negation and despair, show an affirming flame. We are not yet defenseless, as he saw Europe and America to be at that moment in history. We may not be far off, I don't know, but we're not defenseless yet. The harm people are worried about is real, and so our response must be equally real. I am called to take the side of the poor, the marginalized, the vulnerable, the disempowered, and all those treated with injustice and cruelty. We are called to get in the way of systemic injustice, to stand up against tyranny, to agitate the establishment for change so that all people can heal from the wounds of our days and we can all experience more peace. Our work remains to build solidarity, to uphold justice, to shine our light and love bravely in a world too full of desperate loneliness and alienation. I'll close with a James Baldwin quote I was reminded of earlier this week. In his novel, If Beale Street Could Talk, Baldwin wrote, "Love brought you here. If you trusted love this far, don't panic now. In a world without end. May it be so.